Hello and welcome to The Information, where you get all the information on the latest in electronic, indie pop, and experimental music. Today we have an album review. We're reviewing the new Daniel Avery album, Song for Alpha. For those unfamiliar, Daniel Avery is an electronic musician from the UK. He makes a mixture of house, deep house, acid house, electro, techno, and for the past 5 or so years, everybody has been clamoring for a follow-up to his critically acclaimed cult classic Drone Logic, which came out in 2013. That album was a very intoxicating mix of ambient house, electro, and techno music. And in the downtime between Drone Logic and his new album here, Song for Alpha, he pretty much was staying silent for the most part. He had a few mixes, like a DJ Kicks mix that he had put out a couple years ago, but nothing really super official or essential. So once the news came out that Song for Alpha was going to be his official follow-up, people were really excited, myself included. Even the companion piece, the Slow Fade EP that came out earlier this year that sort of prefaced the album, I thought was really great. It was 4 super solid tracks. The title track, Slow Fade, was also included on this album here. And to be honest, I wouldn't have minded if he had included another track or two off that EP on the album here, because I thought those tracks were so good. On Song for Alpha here, we are looking at over an hour of music, just about like an hour 9 minutes, give or take. And it does cover a lot of the same sonic ground that he's covered before. Again, a lot of ambient house, a lot of deep house, a lot of techno here. But to me, the thing that stood out for me most was the emphasis on repetition in this album. Pretty much track for track, except for, of course, like the ambient interludes. Whatever you hear in the first 30 seconds to like 45 seconds of each song is going to be the full list of elements and instruments that you're going to hear throughout the rest of the song. And a lot of these songs get dragged out. Not necessarily dragged out, but they do extend themselves to about 6, 7, 8 minutes in some cases here. Case in point, the first real track here after the ambient intro, Stereo L. We start off with this interesting 303 acid lead, icy reverbed hi-hats come in pretty quickly, and there's a cavernous sub-bass kick. Drum-wise especially, this song, the patterns and the sounds and the textures, they pull very heavily from the track Slow Fade, and to the point where I almost wasn't sure why he ended up including this song on the album. When Slow Fade comes on a couple tracks later down the track list here, the ideas are presented so much better and more polished. They just come across as a little too repetitive here on Stereo L. This track is definitely a signpost for things to come. It's definitely a good intro track in the sense that it lets you know what kind of record you're going to get. It doesn't try to do any purposeful misdirection or present you with like the most inscrutable track first. Not too long into the track, we get a 3-note detuned like synth lead, but that gets kind of annoying very quickly. We do end up getting an extra layer of atmosphere for the last minute or so, but it kind of is a little too late at that point, I think, to really save the track and make it something memorable. And this is just a little bit of a nitpick, but since he was going to name the track Stereo L, I think he really missed a good opportunity to actually pan something over into the left channel. I think that would have been a little bit more fitting, but whatever. It's a production choice. Now the next song, Projector, which was one of the singles leading up to the album, that was the one that had me the most excited for the record, because this song is what I was hoping the entire record would be, in that it does continue that theme of the repetition, of just repeating everything and just looping things and not really having much in the way of sonic detours or really melodies that change and alter as the song goes along. There isn't much progression, but what's here is done pretty much perfectly. We get some very snowy synth chords here, and it's a very simple pattern, just dun 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 dun. But he does change up the key every now and then to keep it from getting too stale. There are some soft, pattering kick drums that get introduced pretty early into the song. Then we get some more rigid hi-hats and some extra atmosphere again. There is a really nice moment at about the 2-minute mark where the song kind of drops out and you get, again, like just a 3-note synth lead, but it's so much more lush and beautiful and serene that when the rest of the song kicks back in as soon as it gets introduced, it's such a nice compliment to everything else that's going on in the track. It's definitely a song that is the most effective in getting you into that hypnotic trance-like state. Not long after that track, we get Sensation, which is the first real dance track of the album. There's a very strange, echoey, kind of atonal ping, like Pong sound. It literally sounds like a sound effect that you would have heard on, like, the Pong game for the NES. And this Pong noise just starts out as one single tone that just gets repeated every bar, but it gets more complex and he adds different tones as the song progresses, which is a little bit cool. There is somewhat of a better sense of development on this track, but what really prevents me from enjoying it and going back for repeated listens is the introduction of this anxiety-inducing vacuum-style synth pad that comes in out of nowhere, really. And the way that it fades in, it's very sudden, and it really kind of took me off guard because I wasn't aware that it was coming. And the way that it fades in, it just sounds like it's just gonna keep rising until like your eardrums burst and you have to like throw the headphones off. Like it's a very menacing sound. It's almost like Tim Hecker at his most aggressive or something, or like if you've ever been to a Tim Hecker live show, I can definitely attest to that being a sound that it had me flash back to. I would say another thing that the synth pad reminds me of is a couple years ago when people were doing the stretching, like the super stretching of like Justin Bieber songs and throwing them up on YouTube and turning them into like 30-minute ambient drones. That's what this kind of reminds me of. It's like a wave crashing in slow motion, but like so slow that like you can hear the particles and like artifacts of it. The next track, Citizen Nowhere, is one of the shorter tracks on the album. It's only about 3.5 minutes. This one to me reminded me the most of something that like One of the Tricks Point Never would do, something off of his Replica album, for instance. There's some very warm, fuzzy ambient drones here, and the drum machine that comes in here, it's very rigid, it's very crackly, it's very brittle sounding. It sounds like it's gonna just snap in half at any moment. And the drums itself, it almost sounds like a sample or something. It has a very like cut and paste quality to it, the way that it's so like herky-jerky and very blocky. The drum pattern does get a little more complex again as the song goes on. It does progress a little bit. There are some really interesting panned hi-hats. There's also a really nice kick drum. It's got a nice tone to it, very trebly. I would say the main thing that I didn't like about this track, besides that it was a little bit shorter, I felt like this one actually could have introduced a couple ideas and, padded it out a little bit longer if he wanted it to. But what I didn't like was the last 30 seconds or so, he fades out the synth pad, and that's really the only other element in the track besides the drums. So you're just stuck with these really brittle sounding drums for like the last 30 seconds of the track. There's literally nothing else going on in the background or anything. And I feel like because they're so stiff and so wonky that they really don't sound good when isolated. The song Clear is another one of the more straightforward songs on the album. This one here is the first real like 4 on the floor, like traditional dance pattern that we hear. There's some more up-tempo percussion here. The low end is really nice, really smooth, a really strong presence by the sub bass here. And again, we get a really interesting texture on the synth pad here. There's a little bit of like warm distortion here. It almost sounds to me, at least the first sound that came to my mind was like a beehive, like just an angry beehive. It does give the song a very menacing and somewhat spooky sound overall. And I do have to say again, I don't really like the detuned synth melody that comes in here as well. And that being said, once you hear that melody within the first minute, you don't get any new elements until about 3.5 minutes into the track, which basically is past the halfway point. And all he really does is add a ride cymbal, and I thought it was mixed a little bit too loudly overall, which is kind of strange because you'd figure with such a minimal track that he'd be able to keep better track of where it is in the mix because he's hearing it for so much of this song. Right after that, we get just about the longest offering on the album, Diminuendo, which is a pummeling beast of a techno track. There's a really urgent kick pattern here and lots of like garbled, almost like alien sound effects and like washes of like noise. There's less importance placed on atmosphere here and more just this being an outright like deep house banger. There's some really crunchy hi-hats, and later on in the track we get some echoey, delayed like dance hall claps. And if anything, I think the title of the track, Diminuendo, which is the opposite of a crescendo, where everything kind of gets less intense and less busy as things go on, this track actually, if anything, is a crescendo, because this one, to me, adds the most elements, I would say, out of any song on the album. And especially as you approach the 4-minute mark here, you get this, again, just a gigantic, overwhelming swath of like synthesizers, and they literally swallow the entire track whole. And the only thing you're left with is this dissonant echo of like noise. And then right when everything seems like it's gone forever, the track just like, it just like sucks back in, and you're just like right back to where things were. And that was an interesting production choice to me, just to include that at all. The longest ambient interlude on the album comes right after that track called Days From Now. There is a slightly off-kilter, again, like synth sound here. It's very plinky. There's a light layer of distortion over it. But following this track up, which essentially, again, is like an extended interlude, with the track Embers, which is just a shorter interlude. That seemed kind of unnecessary to me. I feel like he could have taken Embers out, or just, placed them in the track listing differently so they didn't just like do a 1-2 thing of just ambient. I get it as kind of like a little bit of a palate cleanser, because Diminuendo is like such a heater that you need a little bit of a cool down period. But again, I think it just having 2 interludes back to back just seemed a little bit much to me. But to be fair, right after those 2 interludes, we do get what I believe to be the second best track on the album, Slow Fade. This, to me, reminds me a lot of Xtol, or just really anything in general from Aphex Twin's Saw 1 release. It's pretty sublime ambient techno, if I do say so myself. There's a very steady, unhurried tempo here. Really nice, just like head nodding, close your eyes kind of song. There's a good bounce to the drums. I like a lot of the entrancing acid melodies here, and the percussion spins around the listener's ears very nicely as well. The atmospheres are very vast and very lush, very deep, and I like the dreamlike synth pad that gets introduced around 2 minutes into the track that you kind of ride the song out with. It's very calming and adds a new dimension to the track, which is very nice, and again, like Projector, very complementary to the rest of the sounds around it. With the track Glitter, we get a very dubby deep house tune. There are some sustained, frigid choral synth pads here. Gives it a very spectral feel to the song. As the song progresses, it almost gives off like a Massive Attack vibe, something off of Mezzanine, just in its use of moody darkness and like the sensual bass line, and use of like guitar feedback as an instrument. And then to end the album off, we have the track Quick Eternity, which really is anything but. It has a glassy lead, and there's a flurry of skittering hi-hats. There's a droning synth pad in the background, and really, if anything, I think this song best exemplifies what I'm talking about, in the sense that this is probably the least adventurous track on the album. Everything that you hear in the track is already introduced like pretty much immediately, like within the first 15 seconds of the track. So yeah, to summarize my thoughts on Song for Alpha, overall I would say I was a little bit disappointed with the record. I thought we were going to get some more emphasis on melody here, some more emphasis on being more adventurous and kind of taking you on a journey a little bit. And a lot of the reviews that I've seen for the record do bring up a lot of the same issues and concerns that I have that prevent me from enjoying this album, but they present those in a way that they champion the record for doing that, which is the, to me, mind-numbing repetition oftentimes, and not really having anything memorable in the way of like chord progressions or melodies. So when it comes down to it, I would probably give this thing like a decent to strong 5, maybe a light 6 if I come to enjoy it a little bit more over repeated listens. I know this thing is getting rave reviews, so feel free to tell me how wrong I am in the comments, or maybe you agreed, maybe you thought it was overrated. Not that I'm saying that that's what it was, but I just don't really necessarily agree with what the critics are having to say. But I definitely do understand where they're coming from, at least. This record wasn't for me, unfortunately. I really wanted it to be. But yeah, let me know what you guys thought. If you had a favorite, least favorite track, what should I review next? Thanks for watching. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day. And thank you for watching The Information.